Welcome to Materials in Mind, Rethinking the Future of Construction, the podcast dedicated to helping you scale your property business and build more sustainably. Today, we are diving into the critical world of sustainable materials and circular economy practices. Joining us is Jenny Ford, the visionary behind Materials in Mind. Jenny's expertise focuses on promoting sustainable materials and circular economy principles in construction, offering incredible value to developers, investors, and architects. Jenny, welcome to the show. It's great
Thank-
to have you here.
Thanks very much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Jenny, we had a great pre-call, and I'm really excited to dive into our topic today. For our listeners, let's start by setting the stage. From your perspective, what are the most significant trends or shifts you are currently observing in sustainable construction in the UK?
So I think primarily it's taking a systems approach. That's certainly something for the last, I would say, 5, 6, 7 years since setting up my consultancy. Being able to look at things from a systems perspective has been really important. So that is really about understanding where the workforce is at, what projects need to achieve, and whether workforces are equipped to do that, and whether the infrastructure is in place to enable those things to happen and happen well. So I've been really interested in, I guess, looking across the UK at what sort of different infrastructure systems. So that is either kind of like training spaces, it might be material hubs, it might be suppliers or processing plants, it might be the kind of manufacturing that happens in the UK or its connections to those wider supply chains, and then how that connects to people actually delivering the projects. So I think that systems approach is, for me, really, really key. And that sort of connects into the circular and regenerative economies piece. So as systems become more well established to facilitate circular practice, or thinking about the sort of regeneration of soils and things like that as you're doing a construction project. All of those things are delivering value to sort of master plans. They're delivering value to strategic development plans for kind of local authorities or combined authorities. And it's also looking at just, do things need to be kind of like deconstructed? Can those materials be salvaged? How will they be processed, and can they be put back into those projects? And if not, what is available locally to help sort of facilitate better use of those materials versus sort of downcycling, which is what we've been doing for a really long time.
Are there new technologies that developer needs to be aware of?
Yeah, so I think from the sort of like the digital side is really, really interesting. And certainly a number of kind of construction and real estate sort of research projects have looked heavily at how digital systems kind of like connect into that. So I think one of those is kind of being able to move beyond traditional surveying into using kind of like auditing and inventory processes. And so that sort of connects with maybe like digital twin platforms. So one of my sort of side hustles that we set up early last year is a company called Insight Space. And we're just using or exploring using quite ubiquitous scanning technology, so LiDAR scanning, using Matterport as a platform, just to be able to capture buildings, to be able to look at how that single digital twin might be used for a number of different use cases across the lifespan of a building. And that's, a very kind of simple and practical, affordable level. And then there are lots of different kind of stages of that building into sort of like building information modeling and management. Yeah, it's really a lot going on, but certainly inventory systems, auditing processes, and digital twins, in my opinion, are very kind of strong tools right now.
That's a really insightful overview. You mentioned during our pre-call that cost uncertainty is a major factor and the new material might be more expensive but save on labor. Can you expand on how developers can effectively assess the true cost benefit of sustainable materials and circular practices, looking beyond just the upfront material price?
Yeah. So I think this comes into a bit of introspective sort of work that needs to be done is essentially looking at what your current supply chain model and processes are, understanding what the material palette that you're kind of like normally working with, and where there are opportunities, and often, you know, just starting with those kind of low hanging fruit opportunities to bring in alternative materials, or more locally kind of sourced materials. I think, you know, reuse we can kind of park for a little minute, but thinking about materials that some more sustainable materials that can be substituted quite simply, whether that's from different types of block and where those blocks are sourced, or the kind of ingredients that those block materials contain. Bricks, very, very similarly. There's a lot around kind of clay now as well, and looking at where that is sourced from. So just understanding some core palette, what you're using in your buildings, what you could source more locally, is a really good starting point. Once you start that sort of assessment, understanding the sort of bigger impacts of using certain materials can help you kind of understand, do you want to be sourcing things that are traveling really long distances? Are they heavy materials? It's a bit like understanding or assessing like the carbon impact. So that's, you know, that's often something that developers will be now getting quite used to doing some kind of like simple or quick calculations around, of having to declare kind of like carbon footprints and things like that. Is that if it's big, if it's heavy, bulky, difficult to transport, and it's coming from far away, it's going to definitely have a bigger footprint than it is for something kind of traveling from Europe or the UK. So can you switch that? That's like a very kind of first basic thing to start looking at. And then you've got other things around the sort of social economic impact. So actually spending within an area, being able to calculate how that reflects on your social value outputs, things like that. So that's really interesting. And then there's the other side of it, which is why new and or alternative materials cost more, or are perceived to cost more in the first place. And that's often because of their kind of slow progression to mainstream markets. So there are a couple of really interesting products that for a period of time were definitely kind of like noticeably more expensive. So this may have been like recycled denim insulation is one of kind of my favorite cases to use there, and recently bought by, you know, huge insulation manufacturer, and now they're producing it, and so the cost comes right down. It's kind of economies of scale. So putting effort into something that you think is a good product to use, that works with your projects, that is actually not going to be more time consuming. It's generally a straight replacement, and the workforce will be able to work with it, knowing that at scale those things will just become very comparable with the traditional product that you've been using. And the other part is, yeah, finding things that the workforce can use very readily. So now, particularly if we're kind of looking at the modern methods of construction approaches, alternative materials and products are very much designed to have that workforce in mind. So how they apply them, trying to make it as like for like as possible. So you're not kind of investing in that sort of additional training. There is definitely some thought that needs to be put in with your sort of site managers and project managers leading that approach. But certainly the products themselves definitely designed to be you know, as close to the conventional product that the workforces are used to, but trying to produce, you know, less waste, have better jointing systems, be easier to apply, kind of have, you know, roller. I think the porotherm blocks are a good example. They kind of just like link together, and you put the mortar in one place with a roller that's specially designed for that project. But a bricklayer could very easily kind of pick up that process. So yeah, there's a lot that's happened to make it as practical as possible, with those kind of long-term cost savings in the pipeline.
It's clear that a holistic view is essential. You also highlighted that regulation and insurance for material reuse are challenging, and that the industry is bad at sharing amazing practice, uh, which remains hidden. What are some of the biggest misconceptions developers have about material reuse, and how can we better communicate and visualize the real world application and benefits of these practices?
Yeah. So I think there are sort of three guiding principles, if you like, that would be useful to kind of share here, and they were, I guess, the kind of key learnings that came out from the Circuit project, which was circular construction and regenerative cities. And they were sort of extending building lifespans through refurbishment and adaptive reuse. So being able to understand how reuse operates throughout a building's lifespan. So that could be anything from kind of office fit outs to changing the sort of layout of particular floors and functions. Then we've got maximizing reuse and recycling by implementing urban mining and optimizing pre-demolition audits. So we chatted a little bit about that, and I think that's really key. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, this is about the infrastructure piece. So if you're going to be expecting more reuse to happen, or you want to kind of get involved with reuse, there has to be that supportive infrastructure system. So these urban mines essentially taking resources that are kind of flowing around our urban spaces, urban environments. So things that traditionally might have gone in a skip or been kind of taken away immediately off site, is that actually they need to go somewhere else because they can be very lightly reprocessed, perhaps as an element of remanufacturing or upgrading to happen. But essentially, these urban mines manage that process. So in terms of the sort of insurance and regulatory side, they undertake that work, they de-risk it for developers, and they also help to um, limit the different kind of types of reuse opportunities. So they kind of really understand what materials are flowing around a city, what's expected to be built back into projects, and then they can really, really focus on that kind of the optimal selection of materials. So if you're looking at reuse, engaging with the kind of urban mine space like we're trying to do here in Bristol is really good, because we'll have the expertise to be able to guide designers and developers into what practically can be brought into their projects, and how their conformance and compliance teams can really kind of understand the benefits or limitations around those approaches. And I think just on the last part of the circuit outcomes, which was designing for disassembly and adaptability, thinking about repurposing of future buildings, is that when you're putting components in, whether that is new or kind of like the second use components, is building them and constructing them in such a way that they can be either adapted or demounted later on. So that is very much kind of looking at screws and bolting systems as opposed to nails and glue. So they're quite simple approaches, but very much like a strategic shift in the way that we have traditionally put buildings together. And I think that, again, it's a very kind of holistic approach. So understanding what you can do with materials that have come out of a project, and how you can design better to make sure that your materials would be accessible for a future generation at the end of its lifespan.
That's incredibly valuable for driving adoption. You also shared a crucial piece of advice about getting advice from contractors when tendering for sustainable projects. Why is this so vital? And what specific type of evidence should developers be demanding to ensure contractors can truly deliver on sustainable performance, like passive house specifications?
Yeah, so I think I had a couple of examples where um, with cross tendering, so people, different organizations tendering, and potentially one who had much more experience coming in, putting their bid in, and then being undercut by another company who said, we can definitely deliver this to the performance that you want it to be performed, that you want it to be at. And then actually through that delivery, it emerged that their workforce was not was not skilled to that level. And so, work was repeated, things had to be kind of removed, retested, all these kind of things. And obviously within any kind of reworking that you have to do, there is additional material costs, and other things. So yeah, 100%. I think this is really, really key that we have really open conversations with contractors and look for that evidence base. So have they undertaken this work before? What workforce training do they deliver to make sure that teams are able to kind of put these materials and products in at a high level? Whether it's a similar project and they can kind of show a case study, whether it's the sort of demonstrating who their training partners are, and that the topics that need to be covered are being covered. It's definitely happened a couple of times on major projects that I've been involved with, and one was where we were tendering for a job and were undercut by another company. And it's really, really challenging. But again, much like the supply chain investigation, I think developers have to be aware that in order to deliver on whether you're kind of like delivering into a regeneration area that has a sustainability or circular economy kind of benchmark that they are trying to achieve, that it is on you to do that kind of due diligence on the companies that you engage with, and not just sort of at a price and material level, but it is at that, are the workforce going to be skilled enough to deliver the performance required?
It sounds like due diligence on the contractor side is as important as the material selection itself. Uh, Finally, Jenny, if you were to offer one key piece of advice to a property developer looking to integrate sustainable and circular economy principles into their business for long-term profitability and impact, what would that be?
I think it would be get yourself along to some genuinely sort of circular focused events or networks. And a couple of the things that have emerged more recently, so Tipping Point East in Newham in London, they're essentially like a really large circular economy hub for the UK, circular construction hub. So in terms of being able to see the types of materials at scale, so definitely for anyone who's kind of London based or around that kind of region, that's a place where you can go and witness it at scale, understand how these kind of systems integrate, and understand what it looks like for an urban mine, and to engage with those people getting involved. Also Material Cultures as an organization, so they're researchers and they have a lot of really good publications on their site, so you can go to their publications page and really kind of like pick up on some of these nuanced areas. So you'll be able to see whether it's around like supply chain and local procurement, it might be around bio-based materials, but it gives you a little bit more of a rounded perspective of limitations and opportunities. And another one I would suggest looking at is Materials Index as a platform. So you can go to their site, and Materials Index provides pre-demolition and pre-redevelopment auditing, and have an inventory platform. So you can get a little bit of an overview around what is happening in terms of that digital technology piece, how you're able to assess a building sort of beyond a traditional survey, and get much more kind of insight into the value of materials going in, and just sort of looking at those sites and engaging a little bit with the people who are delivering this work will just really boost kind of confidence in this area, because they are really, really standout projects. And we hope to kind of be working with them all to bring this more relevant work to the southwest, because a lot of this is kind of like London centric. There's a lot of activity around Carlisle. There's been a building, the Resite Builders Hub there for a long time, and so they've kind of like really proven that model. So again, it's for developers, I think, the confidence in knowing that it is happening at scale. And so these are really kind of good projects to dip into. And as I mentioned, like kind of over the next kind of couple of years, we'll really see those start to replicate around the country. And the fact that there'll be kind of the sort of words and language that becomes more familiar to developers, again, that's going to be really helpful as well.
Jenny, this has been a fantastic conversation. You have given our listeners incredible insights into building profitably with circular economy principles and navigating sustainable materials for modern UK developments. Thank you for sharing your expertise from Materials in Mind. Before we wrap up the official podcast segment, I want to ask you something that often comes up with our audience. For many property professionals, the biggest challenge isn't just with understanding sustainable practices, but with consistently implementing them across all projects. Specifically, when it comes to finding reliable, skilled contractors and managing complex supply chains for sustainable materials. If you had a magic wand and could solve one persistent bottleneck for materials in mind that is holding back your growth or making it harder to scale the adoption of sustainable practices, what would that one thing be?
So I think a very direct answer to that is to consider these practices as a business and organizational strategy as opposed to a project strategy. And I think that's so often the problem is that either it's client led or it's a keen project manager who's like, we can integrate this into this particular project. Here's an opportunity. That's great to give you a bit of confidence, but it has to come from that strategic organizational level. And that's definitely where I've shifted in my business. And I'm really excited to get more involved with the infrastructure side. So yeah, with a magic wand, it would definitely be to people shift that just single project focus to being strategic organizational focus, and to work with there's myself, there's many other kind of practitioners and people working in this space who can really help to sort of embed some of those processes and practices at the organizational level, and that is really bringing everyone in your team up to an equal understanding. And that's 100% where my work started. I was in an organization where things were being implemented and they were great things, but it wasn't communicated at an organizational level. And so that really kind of, held things back, held progress back. And so if you want to be progressive, if you want to really make a difference within the industry and you want to really get those cost benefits, then it has to come at that organizational level, not the project level.
That is very clear focus. Can you expand a little on why creating the systematic connection in organizational level is such a significant challenge for materials in mind right now?
Yeah, I think it's traditionally a lot of the things that we've been brought into have been either kind of like a Innovate UK funded, we're working to look at like modern methods of construction, or it's been a single project. We've got a big passive house development, or we've got this particular kind of like community of X number of houses that we're developing. And although they've been kind of good, sizable projects with lots of sort of stakeholders being engaged throughout the process, they have been of that single project focus. And so what I found in my kind of role, I was always kind of like infiltrating. So I would come into a business, I would undertake sort of either a project management role or a supply chain management role. But at the same time, I would have those conversations in the office over lunch around circular and regenerative practice, around different ways of chatting to your supply chain and engaging. So actually through that, you're opening up the sort of conversation, you're opening up the awareness of different staff within your business to the ideas. But it was really tricky to then, sustain that work across. So actually coming in almost directly at let's have a strategic organizational conversation and look at what your values are as a business, where you want to be going, like who you would like to work with, what projects have you seen and what materials have you seen, because that moves you a little way from what any individual client wants into kind of having your own direction. And often that helps to, when you meet those clients, if you've already got that interest and that passion, it helps with the connections. It helps to, like I say, when you're going into the contractor conversations, you are much more knowledgeable and they have to respond to that. If you've built that awareness as a business, and then you're having those conversations with clients and subcontractors and contractors, that it just elevates everything that you can do, and it means that you're much more likely to have positive experiences. And when you have positive experiences, you're much more likely to want to repeat those across multiple projects, and not just those one-off ones. And I think just to come back to that kind of infrastructure piece, once you start doing these things and start integrating certain practices, you become aware of where those gaps are. And often those gaps are infrastructure based. So it might be around that there is no local partner who can do this, or there is no one who's managing, sort of slower practice demolition processes. That means that more materials get recovered wholly, but you become part of that conversation. And that's really critical, because we, as someone kind of working at that systems level, desperately need to have more developers and real estate folk who are telling us what they want. If they have these ambitions, we need to know, so that we can get that sort of local authority, combined authority support to open more of this infrastructure that enables them to deliver on those projects. So you can kind of see how it's very, very interconnected. And we all kind of play a particular role in that, and developers and real estate managers have a really keen role in that process.
Jenny, thank you again for such a valuable discussion. I know our listeners will get a tremendous amount from this episode.
You're very welcome. Thank